I'm starting to recognize the drill of the little churning that happens while everybody gets connected here. So hi, Joe Heim. I was just talking about you, about how I didn't give you enough heads up to help lead this, but I know you will be quick on the go with lots of great questions. Couple more people getting connected here. So we'll give this just a second. So welcome everyone. I'm Vicki Marcus and I am the CEO of the La Crosse Area Chamber of Commerce, and it's great to have you here. What I normally do on our chamber chats is we run through kind of what's the news of the day. So I'm going to share my screen here. Hopefully you all are reacting to the email that went out. Otherwise I will, I know I also had some things out there on social media. So very quickly, what we sent out, let me get rid of my little camera over there. I hope you can see this. Otherwise, Maggie's good at telling me that you can't. Okay, let me run you through really quickly. The big news of yesterday was the slow turning of the dial. So we have now retailers that do have an outside facing door can allow up to 5 customers in. So this allows our small businesses to open up. The statistic that I saw yesterday of those retailers, that's about 90,000 jobs that are employed by those small retail shops. So there is a some guidelines, and you're able to read the order. We also have all these links on our website. We do have our Ready to Reopen toolkit that is available. There's it's 52 pages long, but you don't read it cover to cover. Trust me, you look at your industry and see what the guidelines are for protecting your employees and protecting your customers. There's an FAQ that goes along with the governor's latest order. The city did award their grant, so 59 businesses have received funding through the City of La Crosse funding. Department of Labor has some additional unemployment guidelines. Everybody's watching, of course, what happens with the Supreme Court. And so the question on Wisconsin Supreme Court, where the safer at home extension is in question. And the question I asked yesterday of the Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce was, so if the Supreme Court rules that that extension was not legal, what happens? Is it just a free-for-all, doors open, and it's like the wild, wild west, right? And essentially the Supreme Court has wide authority. And so we really don't know what will happen until that ruling occurs. But it's safe to say, reasonable to say, they don't want the light switch to just flip to on. And so it's expected that there will be some time period that will allow the legislature, again, if the Supreme Court rules that it was not legal, that the state legislature would come together and form a plan and possibly vote to extend it again. Again, the question was, the governor's ability to just extend and on what would have been May 10th without first going to the legislature to approve an extension. And so that's really the piece that we believe will happen, is it goes to the legislature to decide if the state legislature to decide if they want to extend it. Then we start to kick into a little bit of chamber as we normally operate. We have an honor student banquet that we've been doing for 60 years. Ron Kine spoke at it. You were actually an honor student back a few years ago. And essentially it honors the top 5% of 11 area high schools. And of course we can't convene that group. This is a group of high school graduates that have had their senior year significantly disrupted. And so we are shifting to trying to provide scholarships for those students. But WXOW has kindly said that they will broadcast that event. So won't be in person, obviously, but there will be a recognition of all of those students. And so our ask is for businesses to, and the public, to help sponsor scholarships for those students. And then the last thing that I'll focus on, again, chamber as it normally operates, is the survey. There's a wage survey that we partner with several chambers on in Western Wisconsin. When you complete that survey, you have access to the data, which allows you to see how your wages are comparable to other businesses that have completed it in Western Wisconsin. So without further ado, and obviously you can ask questions on that, a little housekeeping thing as we head into Congressman Kine. There's a chat bubble down, at least for me, at the bottom of my desktop that says chat on it. So if you have questions, you can certainly ask them via that chat, or if you're comfortable, you can unmute when we move into Q&A and you can ask that way as well. So without further ado, we have Congressman Ron Kind. Thank you so very much for coming onto our chamber chat here, also known as the Forum Online. And obviously the spotlight is on the federal government at this point, because there's discussions of, is there going to be another relief package? What will it contain? Is it going to help out governments? And so I move the floor to you to give us an update. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you, Vicki. Thank you so much. And to Maggie Christian, too, thanks for helping set up this chat. It's hard to believe it's been a few weeks already since we did this last time, just to touch base and for me to give you an idea of what's coming out of Washington. And it has been fast and furious. On the line with us today, too, is Ethan Holmes, my very capable staff person who is available 24/7 and does a terrific job. So if you don't have Ethan's contact information, I certainly encourage you to grab that. He's a good portal into the office to get questions or concerns or ideas to us as we're working on it. So nice to see Joe Hein in the picture, too. Joe, I see you're starting to grow your hair out a little bit, so it's okay for me to grow my hair out then, too. And it's kind of nice to have hair on my head after last fall and the cancer treatment that my son went under, who, by the way, is doing great, knock on wood, even in the midst of this pandemic. But Vicki, you're right. We are working on a CARES 2 package right now. And every day we're legislating on the phone. We're getting together, we're talking and negotiating the items of what should be in the next package. So either later this week, I'll be heading back to Washington. We'll have a debate and a vote on it, or it'll be sometime early next week. But of course, there's no agreement yet. And hopefully that will come together shortly. But we're also waiting to see what the Wisconsin Supreme Court does. And I'm glad that you put your guidelines up on your website. I know our office has been receiving a lot of questions, a lot of calls about who can reopen, what are the conditions for reopening, how do you keep your workers safe, how do you keep customers safe who do show up at your doorstep. And really, that's the name of the game. Our economy will recover based on trust. The trust of workers going back to work, that they're going to be protected, and that by going home, that they'll also be protecting their own family, and trust of the consumers, that they feel confident going out without contracting the virus. So guidelines are being issued on how to set that up. But if we're short on trust, this recovery is going to be that much longer, that much more painful. And I think with trust comes testing. We've got to get to more comprehensive testing, certainly more than what we're doing right here in our own community, in order to instill that level of confidence for businesses and consumers to feel that when they do go out, that they're not going to be infected. And the only way to do that is by testing. And so many people are asymptomatic. They're carrying the virus. They're not displaying any symptoms. And yet, in order to get a test authorized, you have to be displaying some symptoms of COVID-19. So we're clearly not testing enough people. And you see the situation with the meatpacking plants right now and how quickly this virus can spread. We're also monitoring a pretty severe outbreak in southwestern Wisconsin, down in Grant and Crawford County. A couple larger manufacturers there had the virus spread in their workforce. We have a nursing home down in Grant County, unfortunately, that's battling the virus. So this is not gone, and we're not out of the woods by any stretch. So my life is almost daily in touch with all our healthcare providers throughout the congressional district, the public health departments. I'm glad you guys are going to be talking to our public health department later this week as far as further guidance on the loosening of the economy right now. And yet there's still work to be done. Now, the next CARES package, we're discussing the need to extend the P3 program out. It's due to expire by mid-June. We worked hard to try to get quicker clarification and guidance on who qualifies for that. Obviously, there were a lot of hiccups in the P3 program when it was rolled out. It was a bit unfair for Congress to dump this responsibility on the SBA and expect them to work miracles overnight, given the huge demand that everyone anticipated. So there was a lot of catch up and a lot of frustration, justifiably so, with it. Now we're starting to think how much of these programs, whether it's small business relief, whether it's the unemployment insurance, we need to be thinking about extending out even further, since it's not going to be a snapback recovery economically. So that's part of the discussion. Also part of the discussion is the federal government backfilling state and local budgets that have taken a hit with the revenue collapse that has occurred. State and local governments have tremendously important essential programs and services that they have to maintain right now in the midst of all this, and no one else is capable of doing it. So there's a lot of back and forth in regards to the federal role of helping states and local governments out in this fashion, and to what extent. And hopefully we'll reach agreement on that shortly. And then more money for healthcare providers, PPEs. There's still a shortage in certain areas of personal protection equipment. We're not going to be able to stay ahead of this curve if our healthcare workers don't feel safe showing up at work or safe going home at the end of the day and potentially exposing their families. So we're still dealing with pipeline issues with all of that. And then additional money for the testing that's needed and the new technology testing that everyone's been talking about lately. But I think as we move forward, we have to move forward with the technology we have today and hope and pray that there's going to be a breakthrough to make things easier in the near future. But we also can't rely on that breakthrough and sit back and do nothing in the meantime. So that's kind of what the next CARES package is looking at. I'm also advocating some funding for rural broadband expansion. Nothing is highlighted. The digital divide and the educational inequities that stem from it, with this virus, and the lack of access to broadband, especially in rural Wisconsin and rural America. Been appointed to a national rural broadband task force. So we're having bipartisan discussions what, if anything, should be included in the CARES package in order to really ramp that up in a significant way. Last week I did a video press conference with the librarian of the Library of Congress, just talking about the online learning material that the Library of Congress has available, that teachers can plug in to their own lesson plans, that parents can work with their students during the school year, but also during the summer months, things that are available at the Library of Congress. And I thought, what better time than to teach the story of us to our children, of the United States of America, who we are, where we came from, our history, our culture, our democratic institutions, values that should unite us all as Americans. And the Library of Congress, our great treasure in the country, has all that stuff online right now that they digitized. And everyone has access, as long as they have access to the internet. So again, it goes back to broadband access in our own daily lives. So those are some of the things that we've been working on lately. Obviously, still trying to put out fires as far as the P3 program back home and the EIDL program. And also, I've been really focused on our family farmers and the crisis that they're going through yet again. Last 4 or 5 years have been brutal to family farm operations. This is the perfect storm with the virus right now and the supply chain problems that we have getting commodity to the grocery shelf and to where it needs to go. So a couple of weeks ago, I released a 5-point family farm rescue plan. I'm trying to work with Secretary Perdue at USDA to implement those elements right now. About a week ago, he took a few of them, decided to move forward, but time really is of the essence for our farmers and production agriculture here in Wisconsin and throughout the country. So we're still going to be focused on that as we move forward as well. So Vicki, why don't I just stop right there and maybe take any comments or ideas or just get some feedback from all of you.
Sure. Well, I let everybody gather their thoughts. One ask of you, Ethan, is if you don't mind in the chat to type in your contact information, then it is available to everybody. That would be great.
Yep.
One of my questions, this is just such an expansive road to recovery, right? Every industry is impacted. The only exception I've ever heard has been grocery stores. And so I know one of the pieces that has also been talked about in the next federal plan is infrastructure. Do you see there being finally some movement on funding infrastructure? As we know, in the olden days, infrastructure is one of those go-tos to rebuilding the economy. So what do you see in terms of infrastructure?
Yeah, great question, Vicki. I sure hope so. I mean, we're long overdue to start rebuilding Wisconsin, rebuilding our nation the way we need to, and we're falling behind. And what better opportunity than coming out of this virus right now and trying to help set the table for a strong recovery and investing in basics, our roads, our highways, our bridges, our ports, our airports. We have been falling behind. I would also include in it, as I have in the discussions in Washington, rural broadband infrastructure that's needed, and our waterway infrastructure, given the lock and dam system that we're very dependent on here along the Mississippi River. So those discussions are taking place. The president has expressed some interest, but we're trying to find out what the total package would look like, and then what sustainable revenue source that we can rely upon to fund all this. And that's usually where the discussions break down, is choosing that revenue source. And I hope that doesn't trip us up this time. I'd be a little bit leery of just borrowing moving forward as far as infrastructure investments. We've got to get back at some point to pay-as-you-go budgeting rules. We've been throwing a lot of money out the door in a very short period of time to try to stem the crisis that we're facing right now. But we also need a long-term fiscal management plan for our nation to get our budgets back into balance again when we emerge and when the economy starts recovering. And I've been a part of a bipartisan group in Washington, having those discussions of what a long-term fiscal plan should look like in light of the challenges that we face today, but the need to make crucial investments like infrastructure in the future to keep America competitive and innovative as we emerge.
Absolutely. I was on a webinar this morning where that was brought up we have the federal safety net somewhat in place. Obviously, it keeps getting more woven, so to speak, but we now have a lot of debt happening, and what will shift to paying for debt management, what could have been research and development and some other things that actually help grow our economy. Any thoughts as to where we'll end up in terms of managing our debt as a country?
Yeah, obviously, you want to be doing that when the sun's shining, not when it's raining. And unfortunately, it's still raining economically on us when we've put our economy in a self-imposed coma out of necessity. But as we emerge and as the employment numbers start going back up again and we get a grip on the unemployment, we have to, I think, have a longer-term fiscal management plan. And a good place to start is getting back to pay-as-you-go budgeting. So that if you're offering new spending increases or tax cuts, you got to find an offset in the budget to pay for it. And that worked well in the past to get the budgets under control. 4 years of budget surpluses towards the end of the 1990s. That was under pay-go budget rules. And I think we're going to need something similar to emerge as well. And then dealing with the aging population that we have in our country. 70 million baby boomers who are beginning their massive retirement. About 10,000 a day joining Social Security, Medicare, and what we're going to do to keep those programs solvent as we move forward. But infrastructure is crucial, and right now, obviously, with less people driving, the gas tax revenue has plummeted. So our states aren't in a very good position to be able to funnel that money back into infrastructure projects right now. So that too is part of the conversations, but we're going to need the president to lean in heavily on this, and we've got to be able to work in a bipartisan fashion to address it.
To the economy, sorry, Ann, I just saw you post this. On the economy, I've heard it's somewhat alphabet soup in terms of the letters that are associated. Is this going to be a V, so we saw a sharp decline? It's going to be a sharp rebound. Is it a U, where it's going to be a more gentle rebound? Is it a W, where it's going to have peaks and valleys? What are you hearing in terms of what it's going to take to get our economy back and functioning?
Yeah, Vicki, that's the multi-trillion-dollar question, isn't it? And based on the briefings that us members of Congress have been getting from some of our best healthcare and scientific experts on this, anything short of a vaccine where we can inoculate people throughout our country and globally, since this is a global pandemic, it's going to be kind of an up and down roller coaster ride with the economy. You just hope that we're responsible enough to open up the economy in a way where we don't get a snapback with the virus and then a capacity surge with our healthcare providers. And I'm especially nervous about that still in rural areas where our rural healthcare providers aren't in a great position to deal with a huge surge at their doorstep. And I've been holding my breath that we can avoid that throughout this crisis and stay ahead of the curve in that regard. But until then, I mean, it's testing, it's tracing, it's isolation for those who are detected with the virus, treating those people to keep them healthy. And it's also the antibodies as well, to buy us some time, or actually to buy the medical and scientific world time to develop that vaccine, which is ultimately needed for everyone to feel safe and secure to go out again. And that's going to be a challenge. I get the fact that all of us are experiencing quarantine fever right now. I mean, springtime in Wisconsin is a tough place to be. We're looking at maybe 80s next week. It's hard not to want to be outside. It's hard not to want to be socializing again. It's tough not watching the Brewers playing. But the virus is going to dictate the terms. And right now, we're riding this tiger. We're not controlling it. And we're going to need to rely on the best medical and scientific advice to help us with the gradual dial here, that we do it in a responsible fashion. But I come back to where I started. I think so much of this is going to be based on trust and faith in people. And when they do return to work, they're going to be protected in that workplace. And when people do start going out and start showing up at business doorsteps, it's going to be safe for them to do that. Anything short of that, I don't see a real strong snapback anytime soon.
That's a good segue to Ann Snow at the Children's Museum's question. Any talk about the liability for employers or organizations? So that's been the big discussion of, so you bring people back and someone gets ill, and what's the liability out there for either the retail shop or for the employer? Have you heard any updates on that?
Yeah, thanks, Ann, for that question. There are discussions taking place about that. I think what would be nice is if there are some protocols that businesses can implement, certain boxes that they can check where they're shown as taking steps to protect their workers and also to protect customers or people coming back again. And as long as you're following those steps, you have a prima facie liability immunity with it too. Otherwise, I'm afraid that you could be seeing a lot of lawsuits stemming from this. But then again, you also have to guard against those businesses who may not be as responsible and maybe requiring workers to come back without taking the necessary health safety precautions or infectious control protocols in their workplace. And so we have to be careful with that too. And striking that right balance, I think, is going to be a challenge. But again, those discussions are taking place. And I hope we're able to find a place for us to land so that businesses know with clarity and with clear guidance what they need to be doing to protect people. And as long as they're taking those steps, they'll have some form of liability protection by doing so.
There was a example given to me on it was Cinco de Mayo, and there was a restaurant that I want to say just did not plan well to have a lot of extra customers on that day. And so there were, I was told, 55 people in the restaurant, 25 waiting outside. And so my heart tells me they didn't intend for that to be a red flag, but they just weren't prepared. And so Congressman Kine did mention that we have this checklist, if you will, by industry on our website. So certainly looking at that and documenting and communicating is going to be really key to building that trust. So a question that I have, obviously you and I have interacted on the export import, the EXIM bank that exists, global imports and exports. There's talk about shortening supply chain. So how do we get more products that are closer to home as part of a supply chain, so that as our businesses go to reboot, obviously the suppliers have been disrupted. They were shut down because they're overseas and they shut down at a different time. Trying to get up and running is going to be challenging because of that. Anything that you're hearing in terms of protecting our supply chain moving forward?
Yeah, thanks for that question. Very important too. Obviously, we're experiencing some bottlenecks right now, and there are a couple issues I've been focused on. One is trying to convince the administration to end the trade war. We're still very much interconnected globally. There's still a lot of products that we need to be bringing in for supply chain purposes, including medical equipment that our healthcare providers need right now. And so this tit for tat, trade war that we're in is not helpful at a time like this. And it's certainly not helpful for the exports that our agriculture industry needs and relies upon to get a decent price for their hard work. Then we also have some food supply chain breakdowns too, from milk dumping to some commodity destruction. That should not be happening in the United States. And one of my points on the 5-point Family Farm Rescue Plan is getting the Department of Agriculture at the federal level to do surplus buy-up for commodities, and then make sure we establish those distribution lines to food banks who desperately need it, given the food needs that exist right now in our state, and also establish food distribution centers where food banks don't exist. And using the National Guard to do this. This is what the Guard does. Their logistics, their supply chains. They know how to move things from point A to point B. Last week, I was on the phone with General Nodler, who's new command here with Wisconsin National Guard, and asked him whether he felt the Guard had capability of doing that here in Wisconsin. And he felt very confident and absolutely that they could. So we need to address where there's been market failings in getting product to market right now, and what steps we can be taking at the federal, state, and local level. This is going to have to be a strong partnership there in order to break through those supply issues right now.
Eve, I'm going to put you on the spot because I know you had asked this question in advance, and you're good about unmuting and asking directly. Do you want to ask your question directly?
Certainly. So you've seen that the SBA Inspector General came out with some discrepancies in the purpose of the PPP program. Who is working on correcting that? And is there a timeline for that getting corrected before all of us are at the end of our 8 weeks and struggling?
Yeah, great question, Eve. We're still trying to fine tune and make adjustments to P3 to make sure that it's working well, that the congressional intent is reflected in the rules and regs that have been established now. We have an inspector general that we're trying to work with as well to try to get clarification on it. And then we're trying to establish those parameters in the next CARES package, which again might be coming up at the end of this week or sometime next week. And most of this is based on feedback, that we've been getting from you, even others who are part of the P3 program, as well as our local lenders. And I don't know if there are any local lenders on the line here with us today, but just a quick shout out to them for the hard work that they put in of trying to work with P3 at the initial stages when there was some lack of clarity and guidance with the program. I know they tried working as quickly as they could to get the money out the door as fast as they could. I know our office, Ethan in particular, was taking some calls at 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning with presidents of credit unions and local community banks back home, looking for greater clarification and guidance on this. And we're trying to do the best we can by legislating at the speed of light and learning from mistakes that are made. But again, as I said earlier, one of the bigger issues is the extension of P3 at the expiration of the initial time. I just don't think the economy will be back in any form where we could just start ending these business relief programs the way they're slated to end right now. I think we're going to have to extend those out. And I've been actually working with a group of members of Congress to kind of have some built-in stabilizers for these programs pegged to the unemployment rate. So when the unemployment rate starts coming down, the assistance programs would also come down, commensurate with the economic recovery. That way, Congress doesn't have to go back and do battle every couple of weeks. That creates more uncertainty for businesses and the private sector as far as what's going to happen and when it's going to happen. If we can just deal with the stabilizers based on economic data, that I think would be a lot better way of running these programs rather than just waiting for Congress to get its act together and do something in a bipartisan fashion, which may or may not occur in the time that's needed.
No, thank you for that. So is there a number, and you kind of alluded to it earlier, like I think as businesses, we're going, okay, we need the help, this is great, but at some point, the government's going to run out of money. And then that's going to have some other reoccurring effects down the road. Everyone's worried about a recession coming in the next year out from here. Where do you see that kind of going?
Yeah, great question, Eve. Later this week, Thursday, if you're interested, I'm going to be doing a chat with Eric Ness, who's our SBA regional administrator here in Wisconsin. And I've known Eric for many years, very good. We're going to be talking about this in more specificity as far as what we can look forward to, but also the impact of all this on the 7A and the 504 SBA lending programs. That too hasn't received the type of attention I think that we have to be giving it right now, so that in the next phase that those programs are up and running the way they should be when P3 ultimately starts phasing out. But in the meantime, we're still seeing virus cases going up, and we're still seeing some hot spots developing here in Wisconsin, as I said, in the southwestern part of the state that we're very nervous about right now. I'm glad that the governor has been deploying our National Guard to set up drive-through testing sites in various communities. We've been working very closely with them on where the greatest need is for that. And until a vaccine is developed, this is going to be kind of sketchy because I think people are going to lack the confidence that they need to start getting out and integrating back into the community the way we'd all like to, but still nervous in doing. And that, again, comes from testing. We're just not where we need to be in comprehensive testing. I'm talking about testing the asymptomatic people who have the virus and don't even know it, and they're out there infecting people. We've got to be very careful as far as the spread and what that would do for people's health and the economic recovery.
You talked about, you know, the agriculture and helping out the rural markets, and that's phenomenal. That was one of my questions, because that was one of the things the Inspector General had found, was that, you know, the PPP wasn't hitting those rural areas. Is there something, those of us that are small businesses, I mean, I can't say I can go buy a bunch of eggs and feed them to dogs or anything, but, you know, is there something specific, whether it's a lobbying piece, whether it's writing piece, something that we can do to help out our neighbors here in rural Wisconsin?
Yeah, I tell you, they need a lot of support right now, and we're trying to think creatively on how we can provide relief. One of my points with the rescue plan was making sure that our family farmers did qualify for all the business relief programs, since they are small businesses themselves. I think that clarification now has been given, where the P3 program wasn't going out the door to assist them. The other thing that we learned from the initial round of P3 was the big banks were positioned very well to grab a lot of that, get it out the door to their preferred customer list. So the second round that went out, we had a carve out specifically for community banks and credit unions, so we get back home to our local communities again. And that's worked fairly well, but we're continuing to monitor it and getting feedback as we move forward with it. But yeah, I mean, we've got family farmers taking a hit right now that has a direct impact on the main streets of our rural communities. They do tend to punch above their weight when they got an extra buck in their pocket, and they just don't right now. So I'm afraid that the recovery in rural Wisconsin, rural America, is going to lag compared to most other places. And unfortunately, our family farmers are still on pace for record bankruptcies this year, following 2 years of record bankruptcies. I'm very concerned. We may wake up in a country where we're completely dependent on a few but very large agribusinesses for all our food needs. And that's not what we need for our food security system for our nation.
Do you
Thanks,
foresee, yeah, do you foresee any of the regulations, you know, like some of the farmers saying, I don't want to dump my milk, you know, can people pull up and buy it? Do you see any of the regulations being softened at all, just to help out in the interim?
Yeah, it was a really neat story about a farmer in New York that was marketing directly to people in the area, and almost overnight, he had such a surge in demand, people just wanting to help out family farmers and purchase directly from them. Now, you always get into health concerns about pasteurized and non-pasteurized milk around here. You're probably familiar with that gut-wrenching debate that took place a couple of years ago. But for the sake of people's health, you know, our health departments are going to have to weigh in on the safety in doing all this too, to make sure that we're not making people sick by not following proper healthcare protocols when it comes to food and the marketing of it. So that's always been a challenge. But yeah, we're trying to figure out ways of how we can make the farmer's life easier and make sure that their product is getting to market, so we don't see that destruction taking place on the farm. They don't want to do it. No one wants to see them doing it. And I think there's a unique role for the federal USDA to fill in working with states and local communities to guard against that. Vicki, I think I have time for about one more, and then I'm unfortunately going to have to hop off for another
Sure.
video conference.
Any other questions out there? Otherwise, I can throw one out there about unemployment. So it sounds like you're hearing the same thing that we are, which is we're going to hit an unemployment cliff. We have a lot of people on unemployment now thinking their jobs are going to come back, and they may not. And then unemployment with the federal subsidy, if you will, ends. We're also hearing that it's really the amount that's being paid on unemployment right now is so high that people actually don't want to go back to work because they will make less money. So you touched on this in terms of how do we ramp down unemployment? Any thoughts as to how we get there so we don't have an abrupt cliff where all of a sudden people have no funding?
Yeah, that's a great question, Vic. And that's where this automatic stabilizer proposal we've been working on comes into play, where the unemployment and what level of assistance people are getting would be pegged to the unemployment rate in that area. And I think it's important that we do a regional unemployment database as opposed to a national, because clearly, some areas are going to recover a little bit quicker than others. And so we should be more responsive to what the local needs are. And so as the unemployment rate does reduce, the amount of benefits would also come down proportionally, and the length of time for the extension programs that came from the CARES 1 package would also reflect that. And I think that's a better way of doing it. Most of the economists that we've been in touch with recommend that approach rather than just kind of a knee-jerk, subjective type of approach, waiting for Congress to decide to change programs or to extend them where necessary. I think we should be pegging it to the economic data in regional areas and make sure that our programs reflect that. I think that makes a lot more sense, and it would provide, I think, a lot more certainty to businesses and workers alike.
Fantastic. Thank
Great.
you for that. And so just to wrap us up, as you mentioned, you do have your own webinar coming up on Thursday, and it will be at 4 p.m. And the RSVP was in our email that we sent out to everyone. So you can have more access to Congressman Kind on Thursday. And thank you so very much for coming to our chamber members. We greatly appreciate it. And we wish you luck as you enter that vote this week or next week.
Great.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Vicki. Thanks again for setting this up. And I want to thank all the businesses in the area for stepping up. I mean, it really has been inspirational seeing where even the private sector is finding out where the need exists and doing what they can to help people at a time of need. And that's what makes this area special, that we try to step up and help our fellow neighbors. We're going to need that attitude going forward more than ever. And hopefully, in the words of Joe Heim, a spirit of bipartisanship. I know we're all waiting for the Wisconsin Supreme Court and their decision, but if they do strike down Governor Evers' order, I hope that the leaders of both parties will come together quickly, work together on setting up a plan for Wisconsin to move forward on, just to eliminate the uncertainty that would be caused by such a Supreme Court decision. So that's certainly what I'm encouraging the leadership of our state to do, and I guess we'll find out in any moment here. But thanks again. Everyone stay well and stay healthy.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.